All right, welcome back everybody to On the Record, presented by Shure in association with Ropeadope. Our host Dekel Bor presents this show each week, talking with some of the best producers, engineers, and mixers on the planet. Today we have the great pleasure of chatting with record producer, mixer, and engineer Daryl Thorpe from Los Angeles. And just to talk quickly about Daryl, nine-time Grammy Award winner. He's worked with the Foo Fighters, Radiohead, and Beck, among many others. In doing my research, I was thrilled to find that he worked on one of my two favorite Beck albums, One Foot in the Grave. Dekel Bor has performed with jazz legends Johnny Griffin, Reggie Workman, Pat Martino, Billy Hart, and many, many more. His album Let Love Rule came out on Ropeadope this year and is available at dekelbor.bandcamp.com. I am at a remote location today for quarantine reasons, and just going to patch in real quickly and say hello to Mr. Fabian Brown down at the Ropeadope room so we can get a little glimpse there. Fabian, how are you?
Lewis, I'm doing great. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Thank you for holding things down and keeping the show going as you will. And now we'll just jump over to Berlin. Mr. Dekel Bor, how are you?
I'm good. I'm happy to see you, Lewis. So, for anyone who's watching us for the first time, this was an incredible invitation to celebrate the release of Let Love Rule. It's been out. It's been doing far beyond my wildest dreams. Considered for a Grammy in four categories in jazz, which is not a real Grammy. It's the Jazz Grammy. But with that being said, if you haven't heard it, I hope you might check it out and like it. When we This is a jazz tradition, basically. We reach out to the mentors, to the heroes, to the legends, and ask for advice on a regular basis. It's kind of a backstage hang. And now that I'm working with the next one, I was allowed to come up with a list of uh, my favorite, the biggest ones for me, the ones who changed my life, and reach out for them and basically chat with them. So when we came up with the list, my girlfriend, the goddess she is, basically said, "Baby, can we have Daryl Thorpe?" Which means that every album she ever listens to, knows every lyric by heart, every beat, every break, every drum roll was produced or worked on by Daryl Thorpe. So with that being said, Daryl, how are you? How are you guys doing? Can we
I got
unmute?
I got two screens, and so I lost my mouse. That happens to me all the time.
Me
Sorry
too.
about
Me too.
that.
How are you guys doing? The this past 6 months have been a ride. Everybody's healthy. Everybody's well.
I mean, we're healthy. Yeah, I mean, the most part is like we're healthy. My family's healthy. Everybody's good on my side of the family. And I've had some friends that have unfortunately caught COVID and gotten really sick, but everybody's recovered. So I was really worried about a couple friends of mine, but no,
Um,
fortunately, everyone's safe and healthy still. So
that's
that's
great to hear.
yeah.
We had the same scare in my family,
Oh man, it's terrible.
but I think it just it's been a challenging year, no matter how you look at it.
Oh, it's been just work wise, it's been weird and interesting.
What does
Uh,
that mean? Weird and interesting to you?
me personally, I mean, I can't really complain that much, but I've had a fair amount of projects cancel because of COVID, whether the client was supposed to go into the studio and they didn't feel comfortable working, or I think a lot of people are in the same headspace as the rest of the world. We're just like sit and watch Netflix all day long. I don't feel like being creative. So it's been numerous cases where I've just jobs after jobs cancel. But however, I have a lot of friends that are in the live circuit world, front of house guys, techs, monitor guys. I mean, they're
Yeah, yeah.
so I
We had
my heart powers out to them. Like, dude.
we had a CD release tour for about 40 large concerts planned a year in
Yeah,
advance. The whole thing evaporated in 30 seconds,
yeah, yeah.
more or less.
Yep.
So with all this time on your hand, give me a few recordings that inspired you as a listener, as a fan.
Well, can I be honest, man? I listening to music is just like it's a luxury for me. I don't get to listen to music very much since COVID happened and things were shut down. And even though my studio is private, I didn't want to come in. I just pretty much stayed home and worked from home as much as I could. But I've got extremely busy 3-year-old at home, and
Ah, nice, beautiful,
there's it's his time.
fantastic, fantastic.
So
So,
so
how did
listening to
music?
music
It keeps you
is
busy, the kid.
my son keeps me very busy, keeps us on our toes. Yeah,
Fantastic, fantastic.
yeah. Oh,
So, how did you
up in
get
the mic.
into music in the first place? What was the first second you went like, this is it for me?
Well, I started playing guitar when I was younger, and I'm still a really terrible musician. I think that's why I chose to be an engineer, because I figured I would starve to death as a guitar player. And but funny enough, though, the recording side of the making music or making art seemed way more intriguing to me than being an artist myself.
How
Um,
so? Like, what was about it that you said this is a
I
seal of
guess it's the sort of
inspiration?
like the nerdy side of it. Like, how does that work? Why do you need a preamp? Like, what's a compressor? What does that do? Um, uh, how come there's so many buttons on a mixer board? I don't know. It was just something that I dove in head first and never looked back. Um, and
How did you learn to do? Is this all self taught, or you
No,
had a mentor,
so
or
I had a mentor when I was younger, and I still talk funny enough, I still talk to him. It's pretty amazing. I lost track of him for a while, but that's one of the genius things about social media. As much as I hate it, and as much as it disgusts me half the time,
I completely agree
the
with you.
social media aspect of finding somebody that you haven't talked to in 20 years is like, dude, holy crap, it's amazing. And speaking of, I need to text a friend of mine who I haven't talked to in like 2 years that I found. But so I found my mentor who taught me a lot about he taught me a lot about live sound, and he also started teaching me a little bit more about recording side. And I when I was a teenager, I worked a lot in the live sound world in my hometown of Tucson.
So now that you brought this up, I have to disclose that this is the first time in this series where we were bombarded with questions for the guest. I mean,
Okay,
everybody wants to pick your brain.
okay. I'm
So one of them was, how crucial is live
wow.
sound? I'm going to let you blush later, but
Okay.
what,
Wow.
what how crucial is getting the live experience if you want to evolve to a producer or studio engineer?
Well, they do cross paths. There is they cross paths in certain respects, but at the same token, to me, they're pretty different worlds.
What
Um,
way?
uh, well, it's intriguing how you get. I get a lot of requests to mix things that are recorded live, quote unquote live, and then with the ability of digital consoles now that most front of house and monitor guys are using, whether it be an Avid or a Digico or whatever, they're usually running drives of their recordings. And what happens is the mic hits the preamp, and the preamp goes right to the converter, and the converter taps off and goes to a Pro Tools rig or a Logic rig or whatever device you want to, depending on your system, and you record your tracks live. And it's great for the engineer because one, there's a backup, a digital copy backup of the show. But at the same token, I know engineers use that as their advantage because they'll record Tuesday night show, and then Wednesday they go to another venue, or Wednesday's the same venue, and they just during their sound check they play back last night's show from their recording last night to check the system. And but it's kind of intriguing when you just get their raw files in a studio setting, and you put them up and you kind of go, oh, whoa, man, this is dark and lifeless. But there have, and I know they're doing a lot of processing and some processing in situations to get a desired tone. But I kind of feel like their speakers are really tuned to be extremely aggressive, or they pick the tuning. So therefore their microphone source can be pretty flat. But when it comes out of their mains, it sounds very EQ'd.
I
Difference is
always,
great.
I always thought that that was just the nature of digital consoles.
I don't
They,
know if that's the nature of the digital console, and I could be speaking out of term, and it kind of makes me want to call my good friend and ask him about this. But I think they have, and I did ask my friend Sully about this once, and he said, "Yeah, well, you're dealing with a compression driver, which works extremely different than a regular tweeter does. A compression driver is designed to force sound across a room, especially high frequency. So it's super hyped up already." Because when I look at their EQ curves on their consoles, when they're like my friend Sully, um, I don't feel like he's doing that much EQing to get the vocal to be really open and bright.
yeah. So,
So
and I'm also assuming that if you get like I'm any jazz guy, we're touring guys. That's what you do, and you get to learn so many different venues. There's
yeah,
going to be it's basically an endless journey of troubleshooting.
yeah. Oh,
Anything and everything will go wrong, and
oh,
that I think is priceless for the engineer to kind of learn, have the worst conditions like battle conditions.
well, in battle conditions, and then I got to sit behind my friend. I don't know if he's watching this or not. I hope he's not. But Sean Sullivan is Sully. He was on tour with Shania Twain, and they played Staples, and I was like, "Dude, can I come down and watch you work? Because I just want to see what you do." And he's like, "Yeah." So I sat behind him for sound check, and I think he got like 45 minutes or something, just him and the console and his sound tech, and I watched him dial in his system empty. The stadium was empty, and then it was really incredible when the show started, like 4 hours later with uh I don't know. I don't know how many people Staples holds. 10,000, whatever, 15,000, whatever it holds. And how intrigued I was, like, oh my gosh, this room sounds completely
Completely
different
different,
now.
yeah.
Got all these bodies in there absorbing sound
And changing
and
temperature.
changing temperature and watching him work. Uh, and I asked him, and he's like, "Yeah, first 10 minutes of the show is me retuning the system for a bunch of people, because the room's changed." And I'm like, "Dude, it's such a really I don't have to think that way in my job."
Really?
Yeah.
Because I'm like a fellow guitar player like you. If temperature and humidity changes, the amp react differently, the guitars react differently, the neck will move a little.
But I'm
Everything is
usually
going to sound a little different.
but I'm usually in a studio with air conditioning that's keeping the room pretty steady
Uh,
temperature, and there's only a few bodies in there. So, it's not that drastic. Unless the AC goes out, then we're talking a different story.
So I have some questions, mainly about before we get to those legendary albums. Um,
Mhm.
I'm working
Oh,
on
can I
getting.
just Lewis said that he mentioned that one of his favorites was One Foot in the Grave by Beck that I mixed, and I'm just going to go on record. The One Foot in the Grave I did not mix. I mixed all the B-sides for the re-release, so it's a little confusing there. But as far as like the original album goes, I didn't mix that one. But
Well, I won't tell Lewis, but you just
yeah,
did.
well, he's probably here, right? He's
Um,
listening.
but I will say this before we even go there. Now, I'm basically trying to get the greatest guitar sound ever created, and I'm assuming you have your own tricks, your own things. You mic this, you mic that, behind the amp, in front of the amp, both of it, far from the amp, close to the amp, where on the cone. And I'm sure the list goes on and on and on. So
Yeah.
any tips you can give me will be so appreciated.
What kind of guitar sound are you trying to do?
Beautiful one. I just said the
Well,
best one.
beautiful.
I'm j- um
Medical rock, grunge,
I'm a jazz
jazz.
guy, so everything is clear with as full bodied as it could be, as much punch as it like I'm trying to get a lot of punch, a lot of clarity and size.
Well, to me, that's about first and foremost, I think it's about the amp, and then secondly, it's about the guitar, and then third, it's about the player playing the guitar. Because me playing the same rig with a G chord sounds like the most effed up G chord ever. You playing the same rig on a G chord probably sounds like a G chord should sound.
So, do you have favorite amps that you use or favorite guitars that you like after all those years that you think gets that thing for you?
Oh, well, I'm like if somebody gives me the option of A, B, C, or D, and they're trying to tell me like in a jazz kind of tone, I would definitely go with a Fender Princeton or a Fender Deluxe. Like you can't go wrong with that.
You like the smaller ones?
I do like the smaller ones. I think the smaller ones record better, and I also think that they're just such versatile workhorse amps. And especially if you find a really good sounding, it's pretty easy to find a really good sounding Deluxe or Princeton.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah. And then whether it be like a really nice reissue or a really well taken care of vintage one, that's been
And what do you like in guitars?
uh well, I mean, that's a loaded question. It's just 335 Les Paul, gosh, Strat, Telly, the one, yeah, exactly. The one guitar, I'm not that big of a fan of Tellys. That's just the one thing for me. It's just a personal
Well, I'm a
taste.
Gibson guy, so you're in the right
Oh,
place.
there you go.
But
Yeah.
so and let's go into miking guitars.
Okay.
What do you like doing?
I'm usually a ribbon and a 57 guy. A Shure 57
Same
guy.
here.
Yeah.
And actually, in my experience, and I've been saying this pretty much every episode, in my experience, every time people put all these flashy, super expensive mics on I always kind of when we're mixing, it's for me, it's almost always 90% 57.
Yes. Uh I usually fare more towards the ribbon. Because the ribbon is richer and fuller sounding to my ear, and it sort of it takes more electronic energy to make the ribbon push through a mix more. So that way I feel like I have to turn it up louder than the 57. Whereas the 57 is it's pretty much just bite and clarity at
Yeah.
that. And it takes very little for the bite and clarity to poke through a mix, depending on what's going on, of course. Should I say, depending on what's going on with the program, whether
And
it's
how
if it's a rock tune, um, or
and you play how much time do you allot to playing with the mic in front of a cone, in front of a speaker?
um, I'm a big uh, I'm not lazy about it. I just sort of get down there on my hands and knees with a flashlight and get the two mics placed on the outer edge of the cone. Um, One thing I did learn, I'll say this is kind of a cool trick and I haven't done it in a while, and I should go back to doing it more as Jack Joseph Puig, he showed me a trick. He turns the mics on and he puts a pair of headphones on and he turns the amp on so it's hissing, but no program is going through it. And he just sits there and he moves the mics around until it sounds the loudest to him.
Mm,
Kind of an interesting trick.
yeah.
Where
It is.
then that way you're not getting blasted by the tone.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Next question: favorite outboard gear? What kind of what for to get the Daryl Thorpe sound? Favorite preamps? Favorite this? Favorite that?
Well, 1073. If you just give me a room full of 1073s, I'm fine.
Ah.
Life is good. It's all I need. I don't need anything else. I really don't.
And what about analog versus digital tracking?
Plugins wise, you talking about plugins or recording media?
It's an open question.
Oh,
Open.
open. I'll say this: they both have their place in life.
Well said. So I grew up. My dad is a classical musician in Israel. He's like this legendary,
No way.
famous guy, and I grew up listening to an orchestras, and
Mm-hmm.
then I got to play with them. And also now that I'm on stage with people, you kind of get a feel for what the drums sound like in a room, what the saxophone sounds like in a room. It's a
Sure,
very three-dimensional thing. It's
I
not
understand.
as opposed to guitars, where you basically have this one speaker throwing out sound. You had the experience of s- listening to all those guys in the room, Beck, Radiohead, Foos. It goes on and on and on. What does it sound like in the room? I mean, to just get that feeling.
Well, Foo Fighters are so loud; it's like sticking your head next to a jet engine taking off.
And they're tracking loud, they're rehearsing loud, the whole thing is loud.
That's all they do is loud. It's so funny, man. It's just like what?
What is the experience like? I mean, is this how long is tracking? How long is pre-production? How long is rehearsals? How much of it is improvised? How much of it is super well rehearsed? And what was the experience like for you?
With the Foos,
Yeah, yeah.
I know they rehearse a little bit, but at the same token, I know that they rehearse in the sense that they've sort of flushed out they know the song. But as far as coming up with parts on the fly, that happens all the time. So they're definitely not locked into anything when they start recording. Um, but they generally know the song well enough when they come to the studio. But they're not afraid of, hey, well, we might take longer to figure out the song um, in the studio. They're not scared of that concept. So how long does it take? Some songs took a week. Some songs just took a couple days. It totally depends on what is needed or not needed, or what needs to be flushed out and what doesn't need to be flushed out. So it's kind of a hard question to answer.
And is that rhythm section mostly recorded live and then there's some overdubs, or the whole thing is separated?
They like to record separated because they like to sit down and kind of methodically sit down and think about what their parts are.
Hmm.
So they just kind of each get their own little time to do their
Do
uh,
their thing, yeah.
record their part, do their thing, adjust their part, whatever.
And what are your tricks to getting a separated session sounds like one cohesive band in the same room?
Compression. I don't know. I don't. I learned from Nigel Godrich quickly that I'm not trying to bash on American engineers, but my experience with coming up with working with in America all the time and working with American engineers was that we always just got a sound on a guitar, and that was the sound. And then once you got that sound, then you started recording, but you never looked at the big picture of how the sound is reacting to other things. And one thing I learned from Nigel was when you get drum sounds might be the foundation, but then once you start adding the bass on top of it, is the bass too big, not big enough, too crunchy, not crunchy enough? Is it too distorted, not distorted enough? Is it too dark, needs to be brighter? Like you just start asking yourself all these questions. In a weird way, you're almost like doing this little like premix kind of thing to make sure that the relationship between how big the 26-inch kick drum is relating to the bass guitar in the
Yeah,
mix
yeah.
as you start doing guitars on top of it. So that's my process of how I make a band like the Foos, who are a really good band and very proficient players, and also have really good gear. That their gear sounds great. They're guys that I work with closely. They make sure that their stuff sounds great all the time, and so it's just this uh, sonic decision process per part to make sure it fits.
I
And
think people also often forget that as you especially in overdubbing, anything you
Yes.
overdub,
Yep.
um any new color that you add changes the color of what you had previously.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
I want to add cello, but then all of a sudden the guitar sounds a little darker in your
Right.
mind, even though
Right.
you haven't touched the knob. So I think
And
that's
it's always you're fighting perception of the
exactly,
and
exactly.
it's a big I think it's a big learning curve to realize how the perception is affecting your ear because it plays tricks on me all the time. And I figure and I consider myself to be pretty well versed with what I'm hearing and making decisions, but there's times when I doubt what I'm hearing.
And that has to do with fatigue of the ear, with fatigue of the body, with
Well, I think it can be fatigue of the ear or the particular listening environment you're not familiar with, or you don't have your speakers, so you're listening to somebody else's speakers because they prefer those that type of speakers, and so you're just kind of like, I don't understand these. They don't
so
make.
that would be my next question. Favorite monitors, and then how loud, how soft in the
Um,
mixing.
I mean, I listen pretty loud, but I'm not terrible. My favorite monitors are they're English. They're called Acoustic Energies, and I I have two pair. One pair stays at my studio, and the other pair travels with me to studio, wherever.
And you also try to mixing on different brands, different sounds, different sizes, just to see how it reacts to.
Yeah, I love checking mixes in. I've got a really amazing pair of Focal headphones that I love, um, which takes the element of the room out of the equation.
What I've done with this album that just out is anything that we mixed, I would take each track or each version of the mix, and would just find the most well used broken in shitty Apple earbuds that come with the phone.
Yeah.
And I figured I'm figuring that most people will kind of listen on these kind of things.
Oh yeah, which is why I use they don't make them anymore. They make
When you start anything with that sentence, I'm in. I want to buy it.
well, you can
Let me
find
write that.
them used all the time, but Bose, they're called Bose computer music monitor speakers. They're a little, I think I have enough. Hold on, let me see if I have enough. Oh, that one's all Todd. I don't, it's
Oh, right.
so they're,
I remember these.
so they're, I mean, they're pretty freaking expensive when they came out, which was annoying as hell, but that's, you're paying for the name of Bose. But man, they work really well. And I'll mix on them. They're that trustworthy to my ear. Getting levels and EQing, it's pretty crazy.
But you also hit it on the head with
I've really
saying
gotten to know them pretty well, and they have a. It's insane because as small as they are, they have a kind of a buttload of bass, and I can tell really quickly if my bass or low end is getting out of control in those versus my main monitors. It's kind of funny. Um, but they work, and I also like using them for general vocal placement where I think it should go in the mix, or where the client is instructing me to put it in the put a vocal level in the mix. So
so if we're already speaking about trying the mix on this, trying the premix on that, trying the mix on these, when is something finished for you? I mean, when do you say this is it? The mix is ready.
I kind of go by when I'm quote unquote chasing my tail, when I'm turning the vocal up a dB and then turning the vocal down a dB and then turning the guitar up a dB and then turning the guitar down a dB and then turning the snare up 2 dB and then turning it down 1 dB. Then I just have to step away and go, okay, dude, come on. We're just chasing our tail here. It's cooked. It's done. And quite frankly, that's when I kind of just go, well, I think it's a good time to get the artist involved and let them hear what's going on. And then from there, I let them make the final choices of like, should the snare be up a dB or down?
do you ever get an email from Tom York saying, I think the snare has to be 1 dB up?
Sometimes.
Really? To these kind of details?
Yeah, I get really detailed notes, really, and some artists more than others. Uh, um, LA band that I just finished mixing their EP called Green Frequency. Megan is her name. She was really detail oriented in her mix notes. It was pretty like she was really like, oh, turn the BVs, turn the high harmony up a dB and a half, and
That has to be super nice for you to get
well, it
like,
was, yeah, because it was really easy to do notes.
yeah, as opposed to someone coming and saying, I think this is too dark, or things that are so.
Those are hard because I've had the situations where somebody was literally telling me, um, everything's too wet, dry it up, reverb it. Okay, so I don't mix with a lot of reverb, and I'm like, okay, so I dry things up, and then they're like, look, they're confused and perplexed, and I'll go, wait a minute, and I'm like, okay,
We had
play me something that you think is the direction, and then they'll say, oh, go listen to blah blah blah, and I'll needle drop blah blah, and it is the exact opposite of what they're trying to tell me. It's just drenched in reverb, dripping wet. Okay, so you want things really verbed out and wet, I guess so. And then so it's a fishing game of trying to experiment like what they're looking for, and they can't articulate that, and that's fair. That's totally fine. It just makes it, it's more challenging.
we had my mentor a couple of weeks back, Robert Sadin, who produces Sting and Herbie Hancock and
Oh
Wes
wow.
Schroeder, and he always says there's no such thing as too much reverb. It's almost like that cowbell thing with this. You're gonna want it later, that kind of thing. And I always want to kind of take it out or take it down, or it's a never ending fight
that
about reverb.
that is where we go from taste to that's taste, because I'm a product of the 80s. I'm a Generation Y Xer, and I love 80s music, but holy crap. Could they just, please, for the love of God, give the reverb a break once in a while? It's
Yeah,
just like, dude,
a lot
come
of it
on.
didn't
Give
didn't
the
age.
480 a break once in a while.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
just like, it's obnoxious. But that's the thing though. I love that music, and I love that uh from that era of music. It's just, it speaks to my soul. But as an engineer, I'm like, dude, you
I
gotta.
have to tell you that I'm getting seriously into vinyl and entry level hi-fi. I
Okay.
mean, it's like my biggest passion now that I had to give up motorcycles. So so
I do motorcycles.
exactly. Um so there's this gap of into the introduction. It's basically the introduction of digital tracking,
Yeah.
where it's the sound of the 80s, and everything that was recorded on analog sounds so much better, and then it kind of took them like 10 years or so to kind of catch up.
Wait, you're saying, hold on. You're saying 80s was digital?
Wasn't there like wasn't when was, chronologically speaking, the move to multi-track digital tracking?
Kind of in the 90s.
90s?
Yeah.
Because for me, like anything that was recorded in 1990 or 1992 is already sounds like lost a bit of the punch.
I don't know. Okay, I don't know about like the sort of the pop rock world. I don't know too much. I feel like the pop rock world was still doing a lot of stuff on analog. The one facinet that I'm not sure if you know too much about, but American country, man, they really embraced the digital thing in the 80s, and you can boy, you can hear it.
Also in jazz, it was
Yeah, I would assume in jazz as well, because a lot of jazzers, they just don't like the noise floor of tape, which is
and
funny.
and they're trying to save up.
Oh, you think the cost too?
Of course,
Yeah,
of
but digital
course.
tape then was way more expensive than analog.
But I'm assuming some of the labels just kind of got the gear. I mean, anything that
Uh,
was either on
but
Sony, Columbia, that sort of thing.
oh well, unless you're talking
Geffen.
about like they were making making records on ADATs and things like that. Is that what you think was going on instead of?
It's hard to tell. It's
Yeah,
hard to tell.
I don't really know. But I guess you're right. Maybe digital did kind of start coming around. I do know that in the 80s, man, uh, vintage consoles that we call vintage today is like Neve 80 series were going out of the door and SSLs were coming in. And there's nothing wrong with SSLs. And also people were just like, oh, well, let's screw two compressors, like screw a Fairchild. That's old technology. What do we need that for? Um,
It's hard to maintain.
I don't even know if it was the fact that it was hard to maintain. It was just sort of the thought process of like, this is
I'm
cool.
thinking that was the excuse. Let's get this. This will work forever.
I mean, and let's be honest too, man. A lot of people doing some pretty good drugs through the studios all day long, just out of their minds, sitting there working, making music. Like, does it sound good enough to you? I mean, come on. I've just heard
Well
story after
said.
story after story after story of that.
So if we're already talking about the switch from analog to digital and the changes in the industry,
Yeah.
you were coming up in while still with
Still as analog was king.
Canlong was king, and also the golden age of the record industry. There was
Oh yeah,
the budgets were big.
the last days.
I mean, we'll get you in the studio for 6 months, sort of thing. We'll send you champagne,
Yeah, you
and
still couldn't. It's so I started in '97, and then I guess the peak of my record budgetary wise was 2000, 2001. An average band going in the studio to make a record, you couldn't really make a record for anything under 250 grand. You just couldn't. There was no inbox. There was no Pro Tools rig. There was a
so
Pro Tools rig, but it wasn't stable.
so Pro Tools changed that game of the
Oh,
budgets.
big time. Big time.
Because then you had some guys like Sufjan Stevens with an M box and a 58 doing the whole album in the bedroom.
Yep. Yep.
So what is it like from your perspective to people basically sitting in their bedroom getting you probably sending you files, and I'm assuming it's far from ideal, and and I'm also assuming that the process could take. I can work on a song for 8 months now. I mean, you could really lose yourself in the best and the worst sense of the.
Yes. The clock's not ticking anymore.
Exactly. And you also lose that edge, because if I'm paying $2,000 per day and we only have 3 days to do a jazz album.
Yeah. Plus.
Then I'm every minute in the studio, you're like super focused.
Yeah, because I know I do have a few clients, and I'm not going to say who, but I have a few clients. They watch the clock when they're in the studio. They're just sitting there looking at the clock. Like, oh shit, that just $100 right there. Like, and it's like, dude, I get
How many bars do we get this hour? How many bars?
How much does it cost for five more bars?
Exactly.
And I everybody's on a budget, and I understand that, and everybody's got a particular how much they can afford to make a record, and to make art, I totally get that. I understand that completely. But I do understand that, man, you just gotta in some ways you just can't let that navigate your creativity in the studio. Just make the best of it.
My dad has a saying that you tend to get what you're paying for.
And that is
budgets and gear.
And then the same goes for an engineer. The same goes for an engineer.
So let's say that there are a lot of guys watching this and girls, and they're making music in their bedroom with whatever, what would be your ideal setup for a home studio for someone to work on and then send you the files and have it sound as beautiful as it can?
I would say first and foremost, I think that right now, like an Apollo, a Universal Audio Apollo out of the gate. First of all, I think the converters sound really good on the Apollo. Secondly, I do like the unison technology in the Apollo, that you can tonally shape the preamp going on to record. Secondly, I think I would spend as much money as you can on really good microphones. Whether that be a couple of ribbons, a couple of 57s, and a couple of really good condensers that you can record on. And also whatever you can do to shape your listening environment to be a pretty useful environment. Paneling, actually, like acoustic treatment, is it's really inexpensive. You don't have to spend a whole lot of money. That's the thing about it. There's some companies out there that make prefab stuff that's fairly inexpensive, but at the same token, if you're really, really trying to save money and you would rather dump money on microphones or plugins or just microphone preamps or something like that, the gear, you can make panels for cheap and just put panels up so your room is whatever environment you're trying to record in. But I'll say this, now, mind you, I had great gear at my fingertips, but the new Foos record, that's I don't know when it's coming out. I just know soon. All of that was done in a house, and we didn't do any treatment to the house. The only thing we did was put some baffles up.
Mm.
And we got some cool sounds.
I'm sure you did.
Really
I'm
did.
sure you did. We had questions coming in, people asking me to ask you which pedals did you use on that and that amp for Dave, that kind of thing. I'm not even going to go there. But
I don't know.
I wasn't expecting.
Yeah. Sometimes I pay attention to that, and sometimes I don't.
So I have another. I'm going in another direction. My absolute favorite album of the past 20 years is The Eraser, Tom York, The Eraser. That
Okay.
whole, we're huge Radiohead fans at our house, but The Eraser for me is just it's a masterpiece. And I want come again. I mean, what was the experience like? Just the creation of it and being there in the studio as it happens.
I only worked on the Eraser in a small bit. Funny enough, Tom did a lot of the programming and stuff himself and writing himself, and a lot of the he's pretty self-sufficient at Pro Tools, and since that was like a solo record for him, he was just kind of like in his little studio going to town at that. And I came in on the tail end of it, and
does that include the vocal recordings he recorded on his own? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. He's very efficient and proficient that way. It's pretty amazing. I literally just helped Nigel mix it.
And what was the next step, like the Atoms for Peace thing? What was it like? Like, how did that? What changed?
So the Atoms for Peace started. So then, well, Tom wanted to go out and perform the solo stuff.
Yeah.
And so he put a band together of friends, and they all said yeah, and they decided to just do a couple of shows just for the heck of it, and then it turned out they had fun doing it, so they booked a tour, and then Tom was like, oh, well, let's just make it a band, so it just became Atoms for Peace. And then I was there for the second record, or should I say the first record of Atoms for Peace.
Yeah.
Started that in LA, did a bunch of tracking for 4 or 5 days in the studio, and then from what I know, then Nigel and Tom took it back to England, and they just sat down, and I don't know I can't remember how much was used and how much wasn't used.
And the tracking that you did in LA, it was mostly bass and drums?
It was drums, bass, Tom on guitar, and then I'm brain farting on the percussion player.
Nigel on keyboards.
Yes.
And Another question is how much of it was improvised and how much with it was like songs at that stage.
It was a lot of improvisation at that stage. So
So going back to as much, pretty much the last couple of questions, we cannot leave you without talking about Beck. I mean,
okay.
for my generation, he's the John Lennon of our times,
Yeah, yeah. I kind of feel
and
the same.
I think it's also very interesting how it must be very interesting either tracking or mixing something like the Razor or Atoms for Peace, and then going to that those acoustic guitars, that sound of vocals, the strings, that it's just a very, very, very different landscape.
Yes.
So, first of all, I'm assuming that in the studio you must put on your you open you open the fader, it's just like you go like wow. I mean, just the sound of his voice.
The sound of his voice, yes. Um, I do love that dude's voice. I do.
So, what was the process like for you?
Well, it depends on what we're doing. Um, tracking's either kind of like a crazy throw everything at the kitchen sink at it and then sort out the dead bodies later, or it's something that's a little bit more defined. It depends on what he wants to do. And the case, funny enough, in the case of Morning Phase, it was pretty um it was pretty defined. It's just like, oh, I just want drums, bass, and guitar on this for the tracking. And that's kind of what we did. And then
And
overdub later on.
the basic band, was it recorded live with
Yeah,
him?
yeah.
And how much was of the vocals were kept afterwards?
No vocals were kept. He rewrote all of the lyrics
Ah,
several
wow.
times. Yeah,
And then the rest of it was overdubbed later.
yeah,
And
yeah.
they came in super well rehearsed, kind of under rehearsed to keep it edgy and interesting. What was it like?
Under rehearsed.
And you feel that leaves room for things to happen,
Well, it
or
does leave rooms for things to happen, but at the same token, the guys in like the guys that are in Beck's band, and then also a bunch of my friends who are all session players, they learned a song like that, and it's just like it's insane. They just, what's the song? Okay, you want to write it down or anything? I'm good. It's just a whole. It's a completely utterly different brain process. But besides being an artist, from being an artist, they're just like these just insanely talented players who can learn a song in minutes and then go out there and just lay down this track that's like this performance that's like they've heard the song 1,000 times, but that's what they do for a living. So they're
yeah.
really freaking good at it. And that's just because like Beck's band is his band and they tour with him all the time, but most of those guys are also extremely proficient session players when they're not on the road. They do session after session. So it's like the best of both worlds in that aspect.
And I want to talk about Sea Change, which is really it's like a legendary masterpiece at this point.
Yeah.
How is that different from like was it more him with the guitar and everything laid after? Because I get a sense that it's
Oh,
more vocals, guitar, and drums that happen.
actually, Sea Change was cut pretty live with overdubs done, and also this like the same thing where Beck re-sang, and mostly re-sang because he was writing or rewriting lyrics on the fly. 'Cause he hears a song being recorded and hears it being played back, and it's just his creativity, especially lyrically and melodically, it inspires him to rewrite.
And he does it in the studio. It's a very loose situation.
Yeah, he usually does it in the studio. Yep. Yep.
And how many of those are first takes? 10 takes?
Oh, I can't remember. Sorry, man. I
No,
have
no, of course, of course.
no idea.
So last question, Maestro.
But like,
What's
Paper Tiger was Paper Tiger. Yeah, Paper Tiger was live minus the strings, and then he re-sang the vocal. I know that one.
no,
Lonesome
no, we don't need to go to these kind of things.
Lonesome Tears was live, but re-sang the vocal. Lonesome Tears was live, strings, everything, band string.
Unbelievable. Wow.
Yes, that I remember. But once again, he changed the lyrics, so he re-sang the vocal.
Beautiful. So now you can what's next for you in terms of like a dream project, artist that you would love to work with? It could be like a something you grew up on or anything that you kind of dig that no one kind of knows about.
Uh,
Open ended.
uh, I have this thought all the time, and now that you ask me, I'm a little bit like, I don't know. Why I'm just sitting here going like I'm brain farting,
No,
man.
no, no. I get it. I get it. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but
No, no, it's fine because I have the concept all the time. Um, I have the thought of like, oh, I'd love to do a gig like that. Love to be involved in something like that.
yeah.
I don't know.
Any other genres that you would want to explore that are not associated with you?
Well, okay, it's funny. The one I'm not well, okay, you know what? Here. My dream gig would be if Refused called me tomorrow. That would be my I'd drop the phone. I'd break my phone.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
But they have never called me.
Not yet. Tomorrow
Not
is
yet.
still tomorrow.
Well,
Still to come.
I'm friends with Dennis on Facebook, and he was posting how he was missing playing live, and then I posted something about like I saw their last show, or not their last show. I saw them play last year in San Diego at the end of a tour, and it was one of the best shows I've seen of them because it was literally their last show of that leg. So they were off for a while. And so Dennis just went out and he screamed the whole night. It was just so rad. Um, and so I posted a video of that and he liked it. So I was like, oh, thanks, man.
But you know that sometimes the simplest, most sincere note, kind of like, just so you know, hey, just so you know, I love your work, and maybe
Yeah,
someday
I
it kind of
emailed him once.
stays with people.
Yeah, I emailed him once through Facebook, but he never responded, which is whatever.
I'm assuming he never checks his Facebook. It's probably his
No,
second
he's on it all
assistant.
the time, actually. So it's fine.
So any other exciting projects that you have in the pipe that, except for the next Foo Fighters, that you're excited are coming out?
Uh, everything is pretty up in the air at the moment, so I don't know what's going to happen.
For
And
everyone.
it is for everybody, and quite frankly, it's difficult for me to talk about upcoming projects because number one, I don't know if they're going to happen or not, but number two, I don't want to talk about stuff, especially because a lot of people, a lot of clients are like I worked on a project last year that still has not come out yet, and I'm like, frothing at the mouth to tell people about it, but I can't say anything because I
Of
don't want
course,
to
that's
spoil
their
the
privacy. Of course, of
yeah, I
course.
don't want to spoil the privacy of it's up to the artist to say, okay, we're ready to let this out of the bag, and then
Absolutely.
let the gospel spread, so to speak. But
Absolutely.
meanwhile, inside of me, I'm so proud of it, and I'm like, can we just put it out already? God. But I do know the reason why it's being held, and
Well,
I understand that,
I
but
hear
it's
the
not my
time.
call.
My drummers keep telling me that timing is everything. So,
Well, yes, and in this case, yes, they're really rocking the timing. So, really, 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 really trying to line things up.
Daryl, I can't thank you enough for coming and joining me on this. I learned so much. Speaking to you was an absolute highlight. We've been waiting for this all month or something like that. So just stay safe, and I'll be in
Yeah.
touch. And thanks so much for doing this. If you guys are watching next week, we have the great Von Merrick, and we hope you tune in and stay safe and stay well wherever you are. And we hope to see you live very soon.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thanks for
Cheers.
coming. Bye
Yeah,
bye.
Bye.
All right, everybody. Thanks for coming. Daryl, just want to jump in and comment. I heard your note about 1 foot in the grave from Beck, but I'm even more excited because the number of musicians that I've spoken to is more than 5 that did not even know that that album existed. Uh,
Yeah.
or Stereopathetic Soul Manure. Everybody thinks Mellow Gold was the first Beck album. So I've really,
Yep.
to bring it back out to people's attention is great.
It's such
And
a cool record.
I
And
think it explains a lot about the roots of that musician, of Beck.
it does,
did-
especially the kind of like how this crazy dude can dip his toes into so many formats, and he's good at it all. And there's not a lot of people that can, there are very few people that can do that.
Mhm.
Do you think that's talent?
Oh God, yeah. Can you imagine if Metallica made a folk record? How bad that would be.
There you go. Well, folks, come and join us next week. As Dekel mentioned, hang on the line, guys. We're gonna wrap up the program. I want to tell the audience that you can find these on Shure's YouTube and Facebook channels indefinitely, and please tell your friends about it, and come back and visit us next week. And I'll queue up the technician to go to placeholder, and we'll see you next week.